Give it just another minute or two. There's still a few more people that are popping into the waiting room. And so we will hopefully start here in about 2 minutes. Again, this is the city's Transformational Grants Orientation Workshop, just to make sure that you're in the right place. Give us about 2 minutes and we'll go ahead and get started. Good morning, everyone. It's a few minutes after 10. We're going to go ahead and get started to be respectful of everyone's time today. Again, this is the City of Winston-Salem's Transformational Grants Orientation Workshop. So I hope that you are in the right place. My name is Scott Tesh. I am the city's Budget and Performance Management Director. I do have another city staff member who will also be presenting with us. Meredith Martin is the Deputy Director. She'll be doing a little more of the in-depth walkthrough here. Looking through, I believe we may have additional city staff in the background, but I think you're going to hear from the two of us for a majority of the time. I want to say thank you to everyone here who has joined via Zoom, and it looks like we've got 10 or more people also watching on YouTube, so hopefully we'll have some more guests in both of these, and we'll just let people come in as they do. So as many of you are aware, the city's transformational grant process, that application has already opened last week. And so we are going to go through and answer any questions that you have, as well as walk through that application. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. We've got a little presentation so for some background on where this funding is coming from and some of the minimum requirements for it. So hopefully everyone can see this. Tim, can you give me a thumbs up if you can see it? There we go. Okay, thank you. So again, welcome to the Transformational Grants Orientation Workshop. We're going to briefly talk about the framework from where this funding is coming. There have been several council meetings and a couple of articles in local media, so I want to make sure everybody has the most up-to-date information. We'll talk about minimum requirements specifically for this grant process. How those applications are going to be reviewed, ultimately scored, and potentially funded if selected. And then we'll spend some time actually walking through the application, talking about the sections of the application, and allowing you to ask any questions that you have very specifically about the application process. So first thing I want to talk about, the overall framework. The city received $51.7 million in Arpa CLFRF, or Coronavirus Local Fiscal Recovery Funds. This is the framework that the city is using to administer that money. And so as you can see here, with the appropriations that City Council has recently made for both housing investments and restoring some of the city's worst hit funds, roughly $35 million of that $51.7 million has been appropriated for specific purposes already, which leaves roughly $17 million remaining for any additional programming that the City Council is looking at. From the original framework, we had set aside roughly $10.5 million for social and economics assistance programming, $5 million for digital divide, which could include broadband infrastructure if we get the opportunity to do that from the state, as well as other programming in that area. And then kind of a plug number at the bottom. There have been varying amounts for administrative capacity. And then as some of those programs have shifted, that's kind of the remaining balance still to be reprogrammed as desired by the city council. So wanted to quickly touch on several questions that have come up. How much funding will be available through this process? There is currently $17.1 million available for all future programming. 10.5, I think, is the number that has been tossed around. That was for, like I said, generally social and economic assistance, but not specifically for this program. The amount of funding that will be made available is based on what the mayor and city council end up approving. Really high level minimum requirements for this transformational grant process. It must be a nonprofit entity to apply, either a registered 501c3 or a religious institution that is performing a public service. This is our standard for community agency processes that we run annually as well. And you must have been in business for at least 1 year. So as of March 26th of last year, would have had to have been incorporated by that date. Other than that, those are basically the minimum requirements that we have. There is no minimum funding level or maximum funding level. Entities are free to request funding as small or as large as they feel is needed for the project or program that they're looking to fund or to help with funding. A couple of notes here, as some of this money is ARPA money, as we talked about. There will be specific eligibility guidelines for some of it. We have a link here, and we'll make this presentation available. There are specific areas, and you will see them in the scoring matrix itself, that the city is looking to align with both our strategic plan and with ARPA eligibility. But if you have specific questions about what may be eligible, we have a link here that is to the summary of ARPA eligibility, which is about a 45-page document from U.S. Treasury. The final rule itself is more like 500 pages long. But this summary does a really good job of explaining where Treasury has given us the ability to use ARPA funding. Also want to note pretty quickly that ARPA funding has some pretty stringent guidelines associated with it. Mandatory quarterly reporting to U.S. Treasury. So I know the city does with many of its current processes with community agencies, quarterly reporting. The format is prescribed by U.S. Treasury for this, so it's a little different than what may be required from some of our other processes, but will be required to report quarterly. Will be required to do federal sub-recipient monitoring in using ARPA funds, which will have staff coming and evaluating the programs on site from time to time, as well as looking at backup documentation provided. And do want to note here, for anything that is funded with ARPA dollars, there is a federal requirement if you receive more than $750,000 in federal funds for you to have an audit performed. And that is not just $750,000 from this program, that is $750,000 in the aggregate from federal funding. But there have been some questions about, do we have to have an audit? Do we not? We will touch on that as part of the application process. The answer to that is, if you are under that $750,000 threshold, there are some other things that we can do. If you go over that $750,000 threshold for federal funding, it is a federal requirement that you have a full audit. So want to let that be known on the front end. The application itself, Meredith will talk about this. Parts of the application are based on this scoring matrix that City Council has approved. The scoring matrix is linked directly in the application so that you can pull it up. This is the summary page. There are even more details behind this on how applications will be evaluated. Again, several categories here, but significant details actually in the application linked that will tell you how the responses will be evaluated by staff. Happy to answer any specific questions there as we get to those sections in the application walkthrough. In terms of evaluation, once the applications come in, there will be a staff panel that uses that scoring matrix to provide the preliminary evaluations of each of those programs. They will be sorted into tiers based on those scores, reviewed by the management team for recommendations to the city council. And as we discussed, the mayor and city council will ultimately have the authority to select which projects or programs they wish to fund. Timeline, we're hoping that staff can get many of these evaluated and up for management recommendation a month after the close of the application process. The applications are open until April 25th, hoping by the end of May that we can get through the preliminary scoring of these, potentially have something for management and council review in the June timeframe. That is subject to how many applications we get. The more applications we get, obviously, if it takes us a little longer to get through those, that might back the timeline up a hair. So that was pretty quick at a high level. If there are any questions, comments, concerns at a very high level about the things we've just talked about, feel free to raise your hand, or if there are comments in the chat, try to get to those. Otherwise, I'm going to let Meredith share her screen and kind of walk through. So Kelly Mitter, I see that you've raised your hand. If you'll unmute if you have a question.
Sure. I actually have two questions. One, the grants that we submit, are they for an annual program, or can that be a multi-year program? And then my second question is, can you submit more than one grant application?
So the answer to the first question is you can submit for multi-year funding. Arpa funding has to be obligated by December 31st, 2024 and expended by December 31st, 2026. In most cases, that probably limits you to 3 years or less in getting the application done. So thank you for that question. As to the second one, yes, any entity may submit for more than one project or program. And we would ask, if you have distinct programs, please submit those separately so that they can be evaluated on the merits of those programs individually. So thank you for that, Kelly. I hope that answers both of those questions.
Yes, great. Thank you.
Any additional questions about the kind of overall framework or requirements that we just discussed?
Scott, we have one question in the chat. How does the city define long-term in the matrix?
How does the city define long-term in the matrix? So in terms of responding to that question, we're going to allow you to define long-term. I would definitely consider that to be outside of the range of 1 year. But whether you would like to say long-term is 5 to 10 years down the road or longer, each program may have a different effect and a different horizon for that effect. So we're not going to mandate that it be for a specific time frame, but it would definitely be outside of a year, but would allow you to kind of define how those long-term impacts will be measured for your specific program.
Another question, can the grant cover operational expenses, or is this a project program that's been impacted by COVID?
So is the question, can the grant just cover basic operating expenses of a program that you are already implementing? If that is the case, I will say technically, yes, you can apply for regular operating assistance. What I would say to that is that the scoring matrix is probably going to provide a higher level of funding to those more transformational projects that have additional community impact. So any nonprofit may apply for any amount of money as long as they have been in service for a year, but the intent is to create some sort of transformational change in the community. So I would suggest that those that are new projects or expanded projects or programs are probably the types of thing that the city council would be looking for as part of a transformational grants process. Other comments, questions, concerns? I don't see anything over on YouTube popping up, Meredith. So
I'm not seeing any other questions for now. I'll go on and jump into the application portion. Let me share my screen. So just to give everyone a complete idea of where to find the link to the application, if you go to cityofws.org/CLFRF. This is the homepage that you will go to. And if you click on Transformative Grants Program, that will take you to the specifics for this program. And you can scroll down, provides a lot of information just initially before you even open the application, as well as at the bottom, it provides the scoring matrix, the strategic plan, as well as the link to the application. So when you click the link to the application, it takes you to Neighborly, which is hosting our application. Many of you are probably familiar with this for various programs the city has currently. If you have not used this, you'll need to register prior to logging in to be able to log in. So once you've registered, you are able to log in, you can log in.
Meredith, I'm going to stop you right there. I think someone had their hand up. Was there a question out there?
Yes, I had a question, another question about the matrix. On the matrix, the capacity criterion has the heaviest weight. And to get the highest score, it says the organization's mission and vision aligns with the proposed project. There's existing internal infrastructure to support it, and the plan for implementation and assessment is salient and detailed. Some of these grants, I would imagine, are being applied to expand capacity in order to support scaling existing programs. Can you help walk me through your definition of infrastructure in that capacity?
Sure. The idea behind that is that you have the people and or systems in place to be able to scale up in the case where you're going to do it. If you are trying to scale up a program or create a program that is not something that the organization has ever done before or has any experience in doing, you would need to have some pretty significant write-ups on the partnerships that you are establishing in order to basically create the experience and infrastructure in place to handle the new program. What that is getting at essentially is if an entity were to request $2 or $3 million for a program related to providing healthcare, and their mission is related to transportation, and no one on staff has any experience in the healthcare field, you would not be receiving full points for having the infrastructure and in place to provide those unless you had very salient details on the types of partnerships with other entities that had that experience that you would be contracting and subcontracting with to provide it, if that helps answer that question.
Absolutely, very helpful. Thank you.
Okay. Sorry, Meredith, didn't mean to cut you off there.
Oh, no problem. I'm glad you did before we dove deep in. So again, we're on the homepage once you log in. This illustrates the various programs, but you are going to look for the Arpa, and you can click to start a new application. If you've already opened an application, it will show up top where there's an existing application, and you can view or edit that application. So we'll start a new one where you will need to enter your name. And so the first page of the application will be the general project overview that has very similar information to the website that sent you to the Neighborly portal. It lists the minimum criteria, provides the scoring matrix. If you click the link here with some information, we've provided a link to a video that staff has put together previously regarding how to define your performance measures, which the application will ask for. And then obviously talking about our orientation meeting today, as well as if you need information or have any questions following this meeting, please feel free to email arpa@cityofws.org, or you can call CityLink. And with all pages, you can save them as you progress through them and come back to them, or you can complete and continue. And so once you complete and continue, you'll see over on the left side that portion of the application is finished and you can move on. If you need to go back, you can definitely go back and reopen that page. Just click reopen and the check will remove and you'll be able to re-edit that page. So moving forward, generally A through D are just providing information on your program that you're proposing. So A is the general contact information for the agency. So your name, contact information, your ED, your board chair, very generic information. Again, you can save or complete and continue once you are finished with that page. Section B is providing just the title of the project as well as the primary contact person and the address. I'm trying to break it down so the pages aren't that long, but it's just step by step giving us general information on the project you're proposing. For section C, the general project narrative, this is when you're going to provide a bit more detail on the description of the project, how the funds will be used for that project, the number of participants within the project, the operating funding and potential and capital funding if there's that, who the program benefits, and that general information.
Meredith, I'm going to jump in for 1 second and say,
Yes.
Kelly, the question that you asked about funding timeline horizon, that is specifically what those questions in C are about. So is this a multi-year request? And then we obviously separate out the operating and capital funding requests as well, but you have the timeframes there so that we'll know whether you're talking about a 1-year project or a multi-year project.
Okay, good point, Scott. Section D is where you really illustrate your budget. So as you're building the budget, you can click to add the rows so that you can customize it to how you best want to illustrate your budget. So if it's personnel expenses, you can include that here, and then the amount, and you can continue to add rows just based on what you want to build for your operating costs and your capital costs. As you scroll down further, following the expenditures is the revenue list, and it's very important that the operating revenues match the operating costs. Those should balance as well, and that proves true as well for the capital expenditures. So just make sure all those funds balance. So now, once we move to section E, that's where the alignment with the scoring matrix really starts to appear. If you print out a copy of the scoring matrix or have the scoring matrix on a second screen, you'll be able to follow along the scoring guide with kind of what we're looking for as you complete this information, or what the scorers will be looking for as they complete this information. So section D is the demographic and geographic distribution. It's looking at QCT information, who you're serving or where the program is located. We've provided a link to a QCT mapping tool. So if you're not familiar, you can click there and it will take you to a site very similar to this, where you can enter an address and find out if you are in one of these QCTs. And so that tool will help you complete this portion of the application. Section F is the alignment to the strategic plan. We've provided the generic tiers here within the application, as well as a link to the full strategic plan that has more specific action items within the plan. And then you can note how your program or project fits within the strategic plan, the various tiers, and then any information regarding workload and outcomes, and how that relates to our strategic plan. So section G is collaboration. This is just noting if you're working with other agencies or other entities for your project or program. So you can note that.
Meredith, I'll stop you for 1 second. There is a question in there about word or character limits. There are, in specific categories, word or character limits for different components of it. Some of the areas on the narrative side at the beginning, that we left those pretty wide open, so that someone had the capacity to fully explain kind of their project or program. But there are certain areas where it's character limited, and when you're going through the application, it should tell you when you get to that character limit. But we did our best in many cases to try and to keep, particularly on the project narrative side, that as open as possible.
Perfect. Any other questions? Okay, perfect. So section H, which is the administration. Yes.
I'm sorry. It's, of course, going back a page about partnerships and collaboration. I'm getting a little bit confused, which is definitely normal for me. But anyway, does that also mean like consulting firms you might hire, that kind of thing? Or are you talking about partnerships with other organizations, nonprofit organizations?
So the answer to that would be, we are looking specifically for partnerships in the service provision. So if you are using an external stakeholder group of some kind that is a consultant to just provide background information or something like that, that's not exactly what we're looking for. We're looking for who you would be partnering with to actually provide the service for the project or program. So I would tell you here, detail and list out those things. It would be better to put too much in there and to have someone or an entity that would be questionably an external partner or stakeholder. So I would list as many partners as you think you have there, but what we're really looking for are the entities with which you would be contracting or collaborating to provide the service.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. So for administration and reporting, this is per the U.S. Treasury rules and guidance related to the reporting. So we're looking at workload and effectiveness outcomes. You can move to the bottom to kind of extend these as you enter your information and your various measures. We've tried to help define each of these, as well as so if you have any questions, feel free to email Arpa at cityofws.org to help clarify anything. But hopefully it's very, very informative and defined.
Meredith, we've got a couple questions here in the chat. What is meant by workload? So as a performance metric, workload is generally, and there's the video link that you can watch that the city has put together, but generally workload is output. So how much are you doing? How many clients did you serve? How many meals did you provide? How many units did you produce? Generally, those are types of workload measures. The effectiveness or outcome measures tend to be higher level measures in terms of the percentage of the population that you affected or put in a better circumstance, things like that. We will allow you to define your own workload and effectiveness measures there, but generally workload is kind of the output that's happening, and the effectiveness is whether the program actually met its goals. In terms of if a program was intended to serve 300 people, did it actually serve 300 people, and did it provide them with the necessary tools or change in whatever position was supposed to be provided. There's another question here. The link to the scoring matrix on the website is not working, and the application takes you to the error page, unless it is an error on my end. We will take a look at that. Thank you. Interesting that both of those links aren't working. We will absolutely make sure that they are. I hope there aren't any issues with the different types of web browsers with those, but we will definitely look into that directly. Thank you for the comment.
So the final note I would make on the administration and reporting page, because it's slightly different than some of the other pages, H3 has a risk matrix that we would like you to download and complete, and then you can upload that file once it's completed. And that's just an important step as far as just ensuring your agency has the ability to be able to provide the program you're proposing. So moving on to I, which is the capacity piece, and this is your ability to implement the proposed project. And we have various questions related to that portion. J is impact and community need. So this is where you're describing how you've identified this need within our community. What are your short-term impacts and your long-term impacts if this program is implemented? And then just referencing some of the previous sections as far as outcomes, describe the impacts noted by using those metrics. Section K is related to funding stability, and it's just the annual funding portion and plan funding mechanism for the project and program. And so again, there's an upload function here at the bottom as far as commitment letters for financial support, and you can upload any of those letters here. Section L is representation, and this is simply where you enter the information related to your board members of your agency. And it's similar to the budget page where you can just add rows for each board member and move forward. The final section is the required documentation section, where you can upload each of these files. Here, if you're missing something within this section, you will not be able to complete your complete and submit your application. So make sure the appropriate files are uploaded with each section. And then once all the sections are saved and marked complete and continue at each one, on the left, everything should be checked off, and you should be able to then go to end to click submit for your application. And with that, I will stop sharing my screen and we can move to any questions you may have.
I have a question.
I have a question.
Go ahead. I think Mr. Moore spoke first, so.
Yes. In regards to the grant and the application itself, we will be applying for the first time on this. So I'm just curious about, I know there's really no limit you can ask for, but we didn't want to ask for like too much in regards to our project. Is there anything specific as far as I think it's called the AAR, is it the ARP component of the grant or the type of grant it is? Is like we never applied for a federal grant before. So is there anything like limiting wise that we need to look out for or be aware of in regards to applying for this type of grant?
So the reporting, technically it's while it's federal funds, and so we're held to the reporting standards of the federal government, it is a grant from the city of Winston-Salem's Arpa funds. So it's more of the reporting and administration side that's more stringent than what you're asking to do with through your proposal.
I see. Okay. I see your point. I definitely see that. The reporting, is that something like we have to do like every quarter for like
Yes,
to keep receiving funds? Okay. All right. I just wanted to make sure because I know it was probably said in the beginning, but I kind of didn't get all the information about that at the beginning. But thank you.
Mr. Morris, I'll jump in there from what you may have missed at the beginning. There will be required quarterly reporting. The format for that will be detailed in the contract for those who are selected and funded. The other piece that you may have missed that I do want to talk about again, if in the use of federal monies, as the city is kind of a pass-through entity and you become a sub-recipient of that, or an entity who is funded does, if you receive more than $750,000 in federal funding from any number of programs in a given year, you will be subject to a single audit. You will have to have it done. There is no way around it. It is a federal requirement. So in terms of looking at the availability of funds for that, if you're under that limit, the city will have some other options with respect to audited financial statements, reviewed financial statements, or a series of what are called agreed upon procedures, which is just an accounting term to say we're going to do some specific grant expenditure testing. But if you hit that $750,000 threshold, you will have to be budgeting on your side for an audit of those funds.
Okay, excellent. Thank you so much.
Absolutely.
I hope we get a recording of this too. I don't know if this is coming out.
It is absolutely being recorded and will be available on the city's YouTube page.
Great. Thank you. All right.
Meredith, you want to keep taking questions here, and then we'll go to the chat. There's several in the chat, but we'll take the live questions first.
I think Wells Center was next.
Yes, good morning, everybody. I just have a question regarding, and I'm like the young gentleman, it's our first time applying for such a grant. The SAM's registration, I'm not sure how that works. I went on the site and I couldn't figure out what I don't understand what I'm looking at because we have to be registered. I just need to understand that process.
So I know that you have to go to sam.gov and there is a click here to register component of it. If you're having a problem with that portal itself, it may be better to touch base with us offline and kind of work through that problem directly. Like I said, if you've already been to that website and are just struggling with it, we might have to take a look at what the hang up is there. But we can do that with you offline on a one-on-one basis.
So all you're requiring is for us to register.
Yeah, sam.gov requires you to be registered. There's not another process after that. You just go through the registration. I think it gives you a unique number and then you're done. You just have to be registered. Yes, ma'am.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, Robin Stone.
Good morning. My question is, when you submit your project and your budget, if the decision makers like the project, but they think the ask is too high, will they offer lower, or is it just a yes, no based on what you're asking for?
That is to be determined. I think upon management review, and when it gets to the level with the mayor and city council, they will have the ability to potentially ask you if you can scope that down. We thought about that in the application process and then just didn't add a separate page for kind of scalability to go up or down. I do think in other processes, I'll just say with other jurisdictions throughout the state that have done this, there may have been programs where there was a general inclination that the program would be something that could be funded, but not at the level or scope that it was. So I think that's on an individual project basis to be determined based on what gets submitted.
All right, and that looks like all of our live questions. So I will, Scott, if you want me to, I will start in my chat and then we can go to yours. So the first question, it looks like we answered some of these. Maybe also include letters from collaborating partners in the upload section. I would say yes, that would be encouraged to help with showing that collaboration and that buy-in from both agencies. Can you give an example of a financial letter of support? Scott, did you kind of touch on that, or?
Yeah, that would probably be a very generic letter. So if you're looking at $1 million project, let's say you're asking for $500,000 from the city and $500,000 is being funded by some other organization, we would just be looking for something on letterhead from that organization signed by their executive director or some other officer stating that they have the funds available and an intent to commit those funds to your project. So there's no standard format for that. We'll just be looking for an indication from that other organization that they are a financial partner with you in that. I think tacking on to that, Meredith, there's a question about on my side, the number of additional letters of support or collaborations. I think you get full funding if you've got 3 in the collaboration piece. So feel free to add as many as you want. We would love to see agencies that are really working together, but I think full funding would be if you have 3 or more.
All right.
Meredith, do you have other questions in your queue?
You go ahead.
Okay, let me work back through here. Is there a sample version of the application? There is not a sample version of the application filled out by city staff. Again, if you have specific questions, you can email them to arpa@cityofws.org, and we will do the best we can in answering those from a technical perspective without providing any additional aid beyond the ability to do so. We will work with you as much as we can, but there is not a standard one that's template that's been filled out. Meredith, a very specific one in E1, what percentage need to live in a QCT to check that box versus the E2 option? Can you bring that back up? for us to look at? I want to make
Sure.
sure I answer that one correctly. Yeah, so in terms of E1, I believe we were looking at if it's and I'd have to go back to this, if it's above 50% that were residing in a QCT, that you would have gotten full points for that. I'd have to go back and look at it. We can definitely put that out on the website, but I think it was a majority of the residents had to live within a QCT in order to get the funding for that. Is it, Meredith, do you remember that, or is it in the back end of that matrix? I will go at.
To get full credit, we have it noted. Let me make sure I'm reading from the right section. You demographically distribute resources and the services to get full credit, and it's somewhat demographically for middle credit.
Yeah.
And then you do not for no credit.
So a majority for the E1, when you're looking at that percentage there, it would have to be a majority of the people that you are servicing living in QCTs in order to get that full credit there. I believe that's the way we have it interpreted on the back end. The second part of that question was the E2 option is not specifically in a QCT. What percentage need to live in a QCT? Check that box versus E2. So I think E2 is pretty straightforward in terms of 25% or more must be below the federal poverty line or make less than 60% of area median income. So if you have the demographic profile of the populations that you're going to serve and it meets that one of those two thresholds, it becomes eligible for the full points there. And I would have to go back to the actual percentages below that for the moderate piece. Obviously, if you check the third box, then you're not going to get the specific points for demographic and geographic distribution. But we will go back and verify those amounts and make sure that we make them available on the city's website. Believe we talked about the example of a financial letter of support already. So Meredith, I think that one was in yours. On the scoring matrix, what percentage gets you the full 5 points for diverse leadership? Meredith, I know that is at the bottom of the staff version of the scoring matrix. Essentially, you need to have diversity, both in terms of race or ethnicity and gender that match that of the city. And so do you have, Meredith, those numbers down at the bottom handy?
For representation to receive the full 5 points if both the minority and gender demographics of the executive leadership and board meets or exceeds community demographics.
Yeah, there is a specific, and those cells might be hidden, but we can put that out on the website too. I know that we do have the numbers for that, but would have to dive down into the details for that, but can make it available on the city's website. And Meredith, we can check with Neighborly if that's something that we can just kind of add as a quick text note to that page as well.
Okay. It is at the bottom of the scoring guide. I did find that, Scott.
So I do have a question here. What documentation in terms of backup needs to be added for the E2 section, which is looking at the federal guidelines related to AMI and poverty? When you click on the submit at the end, you will be certifying that everything that you have put in here is truthful to the best of your abilities. So on that one, we're not requiring specific documentation on the application itself, but if you were to be funded, there would be additional exhibits to the contract that we would pull. And so we would require additional documentation specifically for those to make sure that we're meeting some of those federally required pieces. And a lot of that's also going to be required in the reporting component of it as well. So I think that question is one that we answered during the contracting phase for those who specifically are selected.
It's got, Robin Stone has her hand up.
Okay.
For a question.
I have two questions. The first question is on the QCT. I know you said you could put an address in to see if it was located in there. So as you're doing your client review, can you just put zip codes in, or is there a way to get a listing of zip codes?
Zip codes are going to be at a higher level than census tracts. I think the idea for us there is for you to be able to certify that a majority of the people that you are serving are in those. I'm not going to ask you as part of the application, you don't have to go geolocate every single recipient that you have, but would like to see at least some good sample of those, or a note that, yeah, we specifically work in these zip codes and those zip codes overlay the QCTs pretty well. You can't just pop in a zip code and have it aligned directly to a qualified census tract. But I think we would be willing to accept their, general information and some sort of representative sample of the types of recipients that you have.
Would you be able to provide the zip codes that are in that QCT area?
Let me go back and check on that and see if that's something that we can add. It would come with a disclaimer, obviously, that they don't match perfectly. But yes, there are specific zip codes where a majority of those zip codes probably have more of the city's qualified census tracts in them. Let us go back and research that and get an answer to it. I think we can do that, and we'll try and get that information out for you.
Okay, second question, how do you define race and ethnicity?
We left those as text fields for the entity who is entering that information to define it. And I think based on what we get back, that we will be working with our human relations department to make sure that we are correctly identifying what the entities have entered, what the nonprofits have entered there. We want to be very careful that we're allowing for the appropriate level of diversity, but that would be a staff review from our human relations DEI department.
Thank you.
I received a question. If we have an application submitted in the city for a community grant, may we still apply for this Arpa grant? You can. This is a separate process, different funding source. So feel free to complete an application. On YouTube, Scott, we have a question regarding the risk matrix. If I pull that up, do you want to walk folks through that briefly?
We can do that, sure.
All right. Hopefully you can see that.
Meredith, you could zoom in one time or two. I think it'll make it a little easier for all of us to see it. So I will say generally the idea behind the risk assessment here, this is required by the federal government that we do a risk assessment of potential sub-recipients. So most of this we have tried to align to what we know are the uniform grant guidance related to providing federal funding. If there are specific questions in here, I don't know that that we'll go through each one of them one by one unless we really need to. The idea is to provide, in some cases, a qualitative, and if it asks you for a quantitative number, to do that. Was there a specific question about one of the categories? And I believe that was a YouTube one, so it may take that.
The direct question was, can you discuss more about the risk assessment matrix? Is that a tool we need to use and answer in advance? Can you describe more about it for a fuller understanding?
So the idea behind the risk assessment matrix is it's a component of the administrative piece. If you are deemed to be a high risk recipient, What that means for the city, one, you're going to score a little lower on the matrix, on the overall scoring matrix. The second piece is that we have to use this to determine the amount of sub-recipient monitoring that we are going to do if you're awarded. So whether you are a low, medium, or high risk will not necessarily affect. If you're a high risk, it doesn't mean you're not going to get funded. What it means for us is that you will have more site visits from us, and probably we will be looking for additional levels of detail in the reporting that you're doing. It is incumbent upon the city to ensure that those funds are being spent correctly, and the higher risk an organization is, the more the city has to do to monitor that grant. So we're really trying to determine what internal controls you have in place, what infrastructure you have in place, what systems you have in place to perform and report on the project or program. And so the lower level of financial controls that you have and the fewer systems and people you have in place for monitoring, the more we have to step up our monitoring of you. At a high level, that's what that evaluation tool is for. So two of the questions in here are we self-assessing our own risk at this point? Yeah, what we're asking you to do is to do that, to enter in what you believe are the categories, the responses for that, and we will evaluate those. But I think it's very helpful in some of those cases for you again to self-attest that what you're putting there, to the best of your knowledge and abilities, is truthful. Again, we're just trying to determine, if you get funded, the level of sub-recipient monitoring that we're going to have to do, the administrative capacity we have to have in place to ensure that we're meeting all of the audit requirements. Don't see anything else popping up on my side in the chat. Meredith, do you have anything on yours?
I do not.
I've got YouTube up here in the background. Okay, so I know this question has come up several times, and I see it over here on YouTube. What if we don't have an audit? What counts as a third-party review? Would county state monitoring reports count for that? So if you have an audit or a financial review, and those are both technical terms where you would have a certified public accounting firm either perform an audit or a financial review. If you were to reach out to an accounting firm, they would know what the definition of an audit is and the requirements, and they would know what the definition of a financial review is as well. If you do not currently have one of those and cannot provide it as part of the application process, you will note in the required materials that it says you have to upload one. What you need to upload is a letter of intent that says, if you were to receive these funds, that you would be willing to comply with what the city would require, which is going to be either an audit or review, an audit, or as we talked about at the very beginning, those agreed upon procedures. There's 2 or 3 things in those, and we can get the details out, but it's basically a grant expenditure testing that the CPA firm would do, and they would also look at where those checks went and provide some summary of beneficiaries that are above a certain threshold, so that they would be kind of looking for potential conflicts of interests of a certain level as well. So if you don't have an audit or a financial review completed, you can upload a letter saying that you intend to comply either with getting the audit or doing those agreed upon procedures on the back end. I would note again, if you go over that $750,000 threshold for federal funding, you will be subject to an audit, no questions asked. So keep that in mind.
Scott, a question on YouTube. Even if the organization is BIPOC, the board demographics have to be based on the cities.
Meredith, read that one more time. I'm sorry. I think I froze for a second.
Sorry. Even if the organization is BIPOC, do the board demographics have to be based on the cities?
I am unfamiliar with the term BIPOC. Someone wants to chime in. I think Tim actually unmuted there.
Black, Indigenous, and people of color. It's a
Okay.
term that has come into use in recent years to indicate representation.
Thank you, Tim.
Honestly, I was familiar with what the concept was, but I did have to Google the letters because I don't look at that every day.
Yeah. So
Actually, you're all brought that up though.
thank you, Tim. The idea behind that is you don't have to meet individual components of that diversity. If you have any level of again, minority representation, whether it be multiple races or ethnicities, that would count towards the total. We will have, again, our Human Relations, Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Office ensure that we're including the necessary categories in doing those calculations. I hope that answers that question, and if not, I can try and tackle it again. All right, I had another one. Meredith, can you pop up the application to section C?
Sure.
Okay, the question says in C3, if you answer no, and maybe that's intended to be C4. Yep, oh, there we go, C4. If you click C4, will residents be in Winston-Salem? The pop-up asks about other counties. What if it's all Forsyth County, but just not Winston-Salem? Do we enter those cities in the blank? No, you don't have to enter all of Louisville, Kernersville, Rural Hall. You don't have to enter all of that. We're really trying to get a handle on if it's not inside the city, is it inside Forsyth County or is it outside Forsyth County is really what we're trying to get a handle on there. I hope I've not missed anything on my side of the chat.
Can you hear me? Hello?
Yes.
My question is on that same screen. I noticed the question before talked about unique individuals. Can you define that for me?
Sure, Meredith, can you pop that one back up for us?
Sure. The unique participants that you served annually.
Sure. So in some cases, this is going to be estimated, but what we're trying to get a handle on is the number of people that you're serving. So I'll give this as an example. If you run a food bank and you give out, and again, you're going to have to estimate this most likely, and you give out, 1,000 different like book bags or things of food, but it's the same 300 people that get it three times to get to 900. That would be 300 unique participants. So we're looking for the number of participants. I hope I don't describe this wrong for people, not the number of participations. So if one person is using the service multiple times, we only want to count them once there. We're trying to get a handle on the number of intended beneficiaries, not multiplied by the number of times they use the service.
So it's the number of individual people that you have served maybe during the past year without replicating.
It is
twice.
the number of individuals you intend to serve as part of what you're requesting funding for.
Gotcha.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yeah. So I have one in here, says all of our data and numbers are specific to the program we are requesting support for, not to the organization as a whole. Yes, So all of the program outcomes, the program budget piece, we want to be for the program itself. So same thing with that number of unique participants, that should be for the program or project that you're requesting funding for. So if you're a very large organization, we're looking just for that piece that you're requesting funding for.
Go ahead, Kelly.
Sorry, trouble getting off mute there. I had put a message, Meredith, to you in the chat, but it probably blew on by. Just a small question. So I'm assuming the quarterly reporting will be done in Neighborly, like other city grants. And currently in Neighborly, it's set up to report out on a monthly basis. So will that be different in this grant? It just be quarterly, or how will that work?
We're go ahead, Scott.
Can take that one, Kelly. It will be quarterly reporting. We're still having to build out the reporting framework on the back end. So the application is open. The reporting framework for it hasn't been finalized. It will be quarterly reporting to align with the federal reporting guidelines. I will say those are going to be pretty tight at the end of a quarter. We, the city, have to turn that around to Treasury in a month or a little less. So you as an organization will have 2 to 3 weeks to turn that around after a quarter ends if you're selected.
Okay.
And that's just a product of what Treasury is requiring us to do.
Okay, I was just curious because I've never seen it set up that way in Neighborly. So
You're getting a little far ahead of us.
All right, thanks.
I have a question.
Go ahead, Tim.
Hey, Meredith. In Neighborly, can more than one human being for an agency have access to the same application? I can't remember how that works.
I can answer that. Yes.
Yeah.
They can. Thanks, Nancy.
If you,
Kelly,
All right.
I just want to tell Kelly, I like that positive thinking.
I'll share my screen really quickly, Tim, to help with that. So
Yeah, I'm good.
on the left, if you click view users, you can add a user, I believe. And that's how you would be able to allow multiple people access to one application.
That's a good feature. I remember back in the day, they'd actually have to call staff and say, please add me. So glad you got that fixed. It looked like Amanda had some questions that in the YouTube, she made a comment that she said, please see above for a couple of additional questions. I don't know if all her questions got answered.
All right, let me try and move through here. So it looks like we have at least 10% of project budget covered. Can that be an in-kind donation? So, I mean, the answer to that would be yes. If part of your project budget included buying supplies and someone was providing those supplies in kind, that sure, that would absolutely would apply. Next question. Please clearly define the workload and outcome measures that are associated. What is meant by workload? I think we've answered that one already, but again, workload is really defined to be, it's going to vary for each type of project or program, but it's really the output. How much are you doing? So how many residents did you serve? How many meals did you serve? How many hours of counseling were provided, and so forth and so on. So the workload is really a unit of what's being done. Again, there's a video about 10 minutes long, I believe, that helps define some of those too. I would encourage you to click on that link. If a new project is based on a prior program need, then we use workload and outcomes based on the programs for new project expansion. Is that correct? All right, let me wrap my mind around this question for a second. And then my screen froze. Oh, hold on one second. Let me see if I can get that to come back up. Okay, here we go. If a new project is based on prior program need, then we use workload and outcomes based on those programs for the new project expansion. Is that correct? So I'm going to answer this generally and say that the workload and outcomes are for what you are setting up, what you are requesting funding for. So if you're requesting $1 million to do some sort of new healthcare service, we want to know how many people you are going to work with, how many hours you are going to provide, how much financial support you're going to contribute as part of that program expansion, not specifically for what you've done in the past. Continuing down here, we talked about the audit or review piece already. A couple of questions about the risk matrix, and we talked about that. Specifically, we would like you to kind of fill that out as a self-attestation, and the city will review it. Thank you, person in the chat who also indicated BIPOC. Is there anything else that we haven't gotten to? I don't see anything else, Meredith, on my chat in Zoom, or anything that I can see that we've missed in the YouTube portion. Do you have anything else?
I do not.
Any other questions from the group here while we have you? Are these being reviewed on a rolling basis or not until the deadline? The intent is on a rolling basis. The hope there is that we'll get through some of these and expedite the timeline on which we can get these to city council. We have not begun review at this point of anything that has been submitted, but we would love to begin doing the evaluations before the end of the period at April 25th. The faster we can get to them, the faster we can get them in front of management and city council, and the faster we can determine which community partners we might be partnering with. Okay. I'm not seeing anything else, and I'm trying to see if anybody has unmuted or has their hand up, and I don't see anything.
You did say that there was a YouTube channel for this recording, correct?
It will be posted to the city's YouTube page. I will tell you that the way that I find that is to Google City of WS YouTube, and it'll be the first thing that pops up, and you can click on it and kind of scroll through the videos and find it. They are usually, the videos are listed in chronological order, so you can kind of just go back and find April 1st. If you're looking tomorrow, it'd be easy, but if you're a couple of weeks down the road, you might have to scroll a little bit.
Thank you.
I'll add a direct link to this specific recording to the CLFRF website as well to make it easily accessible.
Great, thanks, Meredith. Well, I hope that we have been able to answer as many of the questions here today. I would tell you again, that email address, arpa@cityofws.org, is being monitored daily by staff. Feel free to send us your inquiries that way. And if put your phone number in there, and if we need to call you directly, we can do that to make sure that we work out any details. Would love to thank everyone for their time here today. I think staff will hang out for another couple of minutes just in case there are other questions that pop up, but it doesn't appear that I'm seeing any. So again, thank you very much. Look forward to applications from everyone who is here and many other organizations who are not. And we're just excited to be part of a process where we can be making transformational change in the community, and look forward to working with you.
Scott?
Yes.
Thank you. I was just saying thank you.
Yes, ma'am.